I'm sure Mr. Simon will work it out. Give you regards for Moshe. I gave him this morning. Told you. Told you. Okay. Anyway, today is the 11th of Tammuz, the eve of the 12th of Tammuz. 12th of Tammuz in the Chabad calendar is a very significant day for two reasons. First of all, it's the birthday of the previous Lubavitcher Rebbe, who was born in 1880 in Tafresh Mem. It's 144 years ago tomorrow. And 47 years later, in Tafresh Tezayin in 1927, he was miraculously liberated from Soviet prison on the same day. The 11th of Tammuz is actually also a significant date. The Frierdiker Rebbe is the only Rebbe that I'm aware of that documented his childhood. He kept a diary, and in his diary also includes a lot of information about his childhood. And one of the things that he writes about, which is quite surprising, is that when he is a day before his 11th birthday, Yud Beis Tammuz, Tafresh Nun Aleph, 1891, was on the Shabbos. And on the Friday before his birthday, his father called him in, and he told him that he's going to begin to put on tefillin. A day before his 11th birthday, told him he's going to begin to put on tefillin, but it should remain completely secret. So what his father told him to do is that every morning he should come to his father's room. There he will put on tefillin and daven, and then he'll go to shul, and while everybody else is davening, he will review his mishmayos and whatever else he has to do, and make it look like he's joining with the davening. So he doesn't draw attention to the fact that he's not joining with the meeting. Being that an 11-year-old has a very small body, and the tefillin that we use in Chabad are quite large, the tefillin has to fit on the muscle. So his grandfather, the Rebbe Marnash, when he passed away, used to put on in the morning, for Kriyas Shema, in the morning, he used to put on 2 pairs of tefillin simultaneously. After that, he had special small tefillin. So his father gave him his grandfather's small Rashi tefillin, which he told him to use in the meantime until his body grows and he's able to wear a bigger tefillin, to use those tefillin every morning to daven. He davened every morning with his grandfather's miniature Rashi tefillin. Then 2 months before his bar mitzvah, he publicly began to daven. Like the custom in Chabad in general is that a bar mitzvah work starts 2 months before. As far as the 12th of Tammuz is concerned, which I mentioned that in addition to being the birthday of the Frierdiker Rebbe, it's also the day of liberation. So I'm just going to give a little bit of give us a little bit of a picture. So there's a famous story that the Frierdiker Rebbe was in prison in Spalerke in Leningrad, which is a very, very heavy, top security prison for the worst criminals, ones that are accused of severe counter-revolutionary activity. And Frierdiker Rebbe was arrested on the 15th of Sivan and taken to Spalerke. And after 2 weeks in Spalerke, which he writes in his diary what it was like, it was no fun. Various the discomfort and the fright and the torture, punishments that were given out as a little form of disobedience. But on Rosh Chodesh Tammuz, which was 2 weeks after his imprisonment, 3 guards came into his cell and they told him to rise. The reason they told him to rise was because the rule in Balak was that when a prisoner received instructions from his superiors, and he had to rise to show reverence for the authorities. So the Frierdiker Rebbe said, I will not rise. I will not rise because I don't want to show any respect for an institution that is out to destroy you. So they said, if you don't rise, we will beat you. I said, okay, no. So they kept their threat and they beat him, gave him a beating. And they left. Short while later, another group of guards came in and told him to rise. And he said, no. They said, if you don't rise, we'll beat you. One of the guards was a Jewish man. And he specifically told the Rebbe that if you don't rise, they're going to beat you and it's not worth it for you. And he said to the Rebbe, we're going to teach you a lesson. The Rebbe said, we will see who will teach whom the lesson. And they gave him a beating. And the Jewish guard is the one who actually delivered the beating. And then they left. And then, a short while later, he was told to come to the office. This he obeyed, came to the office, and in the office, he got a chance to see the document of his verdict. And on the document, the top line of the document said, death by firing squad, and then that was crossed out. The next line of the document, in other words, their intention originally was to have, the original verdict was death by firing squad, but miraculously that was canceled. And the next line said 10 years hard labor in the Isles of Solovki, which is labor camp somewhere in a godforsaken place. And next to it said niet, no, it's also rejected. Then it said 3 years exile in Kostroma. Kostroma was a small town, 24 hours by train from Leningrad. It was a very small Jewish community, so he did not have an opportunity over there have much of an influence as he did when he was in Leningrad. And so the verdict was to exile him 3 years to Kostroma. And he was told that he will be allowed to leave the prison today and go home and spend 6 hours with his family. And after that, he has to report to the train station in Leningrad, from where he will board a train to Kostroma. This was on a Thursday. It was Thursday morning. So the first question that he asked was, when do I arrive in Kostroma? When do I arrive in Kostroma? The train is leaving Thursday night. Approximately a 24-hour journey. When do I arrive in Kostroma? So they told him on Shabbos. So he said, I refuse to travel on Shabbos. I will not travel on Shabbos. And just like in a prison in general, a prison like Spalerke, they don't consult with you when they take you in. They don't consult with you when they send you out. It's not a hotel that you can extend your booking. But Frierdiker Rebbe said that he refuses to travel on Shabbos. So since they were not prepared to let him stay for more than 6 hours at home, so the agreement was to let him stay voluntarily in prison until Sunday, another 3 days. This is Thursday, that's Friday, Shabbos, Sunday, another 3 days. And then on Sunday, they're going to let him out, let him go and spend 6 hours with his family, and Sunday night, to board a train to Kostroma. Now, just to understand what it means to choose to elect to stay another 3 days in this prison, you read the Frierdiker Rebbe's diary when he describes how they were very strict about the curfew. 11 o'clock at night, everybody had to be quiet, lying down, going to sleep. But by about 12:30, the firing squad started. So the noise was so strong and the fright was so great that you couldn't sleep a whole night anyway. And nobody knew who was going to be next. And you couldn't trust these people that they weren't going to change their mind. Just because they said, we'll give you another 3 days doesn't mean that he's going to survive those 3 days. They weren't so trustworthy. So by choosing to stay in prison for another 3 days, this was absolute Mesiras Nefesh. But he didn't want to cause them. They wanted him dafka to travel on Shabbos, and they could pride themselves that we forced the Levavitch Rebbe to travel on Shabbos. He didn't want to be part of that solution. So he refused to travel on Shabbos. For this, he voluntarily stayed in prison for 3 days. And on Sunday, Gimel Tammuz, he was released from prison. He should go home, spend 6 hours with his family, then report to the train station that night to board a train to Kostroma. In fact, when he came to the train station in Kostroma and in Leningrad to board the train to Kostroma on the night on Gimel Tammuz late afternoon, early evening, there were hundreds of people that had gathered to see him off. Now, these hundreds of people were endangering their very lives by showing up, because he was considered guilty as a counter-revolutionary. So anyone supported him was risking life, imprisonment, their job, everything. But nevertheless, hundreds of people showed up to see him off. And at the train station, he spoke. He gave a talk before he boarded the train. He gave a talk encouraging Yidden to be steadfast in their Yiddishkeit. Saying, the point that he made at that talk was that we have bodies and souls, and only our bodies were sent into Golus. So the nations of the world only have the right to control our bodies. But as far as our neshamas are concerned, our neshamas were never sent. So the nations of the world don't have a right to make decrees against our neshamas. And therefore, this decree against Yiddishkeit is completely out of the remit of what Golus is meant to be, and what the nations of the world were given the right to have jurisdiction over the Jewish people. And therefore, they shouldn't be taken. They shouldn't be obeyed. People should continue to educate their children according to the traditions of Yiddishkeit and not take any notice of the communist decrees. Now, for such a speech making in the train station in Leningrad, could have been shot on the spot. And everybody that came to listen to him could have been shot on the spot. But he did his absolute Mesiras Nefesh. And then he boarded the train to Kostroma. And while he was in Kostroma, he was able to stay in a private dwelling. Didn't interfere with the fact that Rebbetzin Chayamushka, his daughter, went to Kostroma to accompany him to Kostroma to help him. And once a week, he had to report to the local police station just to say that he's still there. So the next Tuesday, which was Yud Beis Tammuz, when he came to the police station to report, they told him that they had just received instructions from the central government in Moscow to free him, to allow him to go back home. So he had come for 3 years, ended up being there 9 days, and he was informed that this instruction has come from the central government in Moscow to free him. But because it was a local legal holiday, they weren't able to provide the documents that he needed to be able to be free. They told him to come back again tomorrow, so they'll be able to provide the documents. So that's why we celebrate 2 days, the 12th and the 13th of Tammuz. The 12th is when he was informed that he's free, and the 13th is when he was actually able to leave. He made his way back to Leningrad, back at Leningrad for Shabbos, and immediately efforts were made to get him out of the country, because they knew that the communists in Leningrad were not going to remain calm. They were going to rearrest him, and miraculously, it was worked out. Right after Simchas Torah, a few months later, he was able to leave Russia and emigrate to Riga, Latvia, and where he was able to continue his work on behalf of Russian Jewry in a much better position, a much stronger way than he was able to until then, and also be effective in spreading Yiddishkeit and spreading Chassidus in the free world as well, not just have an impact on Soviet Jewry, have an impact on world Jewry. And eventually went to America, and the rest is history. So this is all connected with the Yom Tov, Yud Beis Tammuz, which we celebrate tonight, tomorrow, Friday, and it's basically Yom Tov of Mesiras Nefesh. Celebrates the Friedrich Rebbe's Mesiras Nefesh for Yiddishkeit, and inspires every one of us in our own way We have the Mesiras Nefesh that we need to have in each and every one of us in our situation. It reminds me of a story I heard from my father, a beautiful story, that stories about the Apter Rav. The Apter Rav was one of the Talmidim of the Mezritcher Magid. He was a colleague of the Alter Rebbe. And the story goes that in that time, in Russia, a Jew was not accepted in the Tsar's army. Jews were not considered to be good enough, trustworthy enough, or loyal enough to be soldiers in the Tsar's army. A generation later, in the time of the Mittler Rebbe, when they started the Cantonist arrangement, where they had Jewish children drafted at a very young age, where they could mold them and educate them so that they should be trustworthy, they should be dedicated and loyal to the Tsar. But at this point, time of the Alter Rebbe, Jews were not accepted in the Tsar's army. So there was a Jewish boy who was very excited about the whole concept of military. He was it caught his fancy. So a soldier in uniform, a gun, whatever, was very impressed. So so he very much wanted to become a soldier. But being that he was Jewish, he wasn't eligible. And he accepted it at one point, but then it came back to him, and it really drilled in him. He wanted very much to join the army. And ultimately, the Nisayan was too great for him. His passion to join the army was so strong that he succumbed to the temptation. He went to the local priest, he had himself baptized, and he went to join the army. He was in the army for some time, and one time his battalion traveled through the city where the Apter Rav lived, and they were given a few hours free to roam the town. He went around the town, and he saw a Beis HaMedrash. Being a Jewish boy, he went into the Beis HaMedrash to see what's happening over there. People started a conversation with him, trying to see who he is. It was a very strange phenomenon because he was a soldier, military garb, spoke Yiddish. So it was a little bit strange because they knew that there were no Jewish soldiers in the Tsar's army. So it didn't take long for everybody to realize that he's a Meshulam. He's a Jew who gave up his faith and embraced Christianity. So people distanced themselves from him, except the Apter Rav himself. The Apter Rav himself took him aside, and he spoke to him, he gave him attention, and he showed him care. And eventually, the Apter Rav convinced him, short time that he was there, he convinced him to join Beis HaMedrash, become a Talmud of his. He could take off his army uniform and put on normal clothes and become a yeshiva bacher in the Apter Rav's Beis HaMedrash, which he did. Now, obviously, the army came time to leave the city, and there was one missing. And they went to look for him everywhere. They couldn't find him, so they left. Sometime, and he remained with the Apter Rav, and he learned and davened and became became a good Jew. Sometime later, the same battalion traveled through the same town again, and somebody noticed him and recognized him. So they brought him to the to the general to have him court-martialed, deserter. So the general asked him, "What can you say in your defense?" So he said, "I'll tell you the truth. This town is a very charismatic man. Very charismatic man. It's like he has such a magical charisma. He asks you to do something, it's almost impossible to say no. And he convinced me to desert the army and return to my faith. So I followed him." And the general said, "If that's the case, you should go and arrest the rabbi. It's his fault." So he sent a battalion of soldiers to arrest the rabbi. They came and they arrested the Apter Rav, and they led him in chains through the city to bring him to the general, so he should be court-martialed. So the Apter Rav understood what was going on. He understood that the situation it looks very grim. Because what could he say in his defense? And it was Parshas Balak. Now, Parshas Balak. And they stopped on the way for a rest, a few minutes of rest. So he lifted up his hands to heaven. And he said, Rabbi Shalom, it says in this week's said, Mi mana afar Yaakov. It's actually in Umispar Esreva Yisrael. Today's chitas. Kamais nafshi mais yesharim usehiya harisi kamay. And he explained the pasuk as follows. He said, Mi mana afar Yaakov. Who can count how many times Yaakov, Yidden, were crushed into dust? Umispar Esreva Yisrael. Who can count how many times Yidden were cut into quarters? And I know, he said, what's in store for me. But I have a prayer to offer to myself. My prayer is the continuation of the pasuk. I want to live out the rest of my days and die a natural, normal death. And for this, I'm prepared to make a commitment. That the rest of my life should be like Mesiras Nefesh. In other words, Hashem has obviously chosen for me to die on Kiddush Hashem. I am putting in an offer. Instead of dying on Kiddush Hashem, I'm offering to live on Kiddush Hashem, to devote my life to sanctifying Hashem. And in that merit, I should be spared. That was his prayer. Anyway, he went further and he came to the general and the witnesses, and they testified, and the witnesses contradicted each other, and the general threw the case out. He was sent scot-free. No explanation. The witnesses contradicted each other. The evidence was rejected. Yeah, case is closed. So the point that I want to bring out from the story is that Yud Beis Tammuz is a Yom Tov when we celebrate Mesiras Nefesh, literal Mesiras Nefesh, the way things were in communist Russia, 1920s, 1930s, 1940s. To be a Yid of Yiddishkeit was literally Mesiras Nefesh. I mean, we know people who, their relatives, their fathers, their husbands, were literally shot for Yiddishkeit. I mean, you remember that Tzia Shagalov, Rachel Levine, their father, Rebbe Chana Shagalov, was a double criminal. He was a Malamed and a Moyel. Can you imagine what kind of criminal he was? A Malamed and a Moyel. He was shot. He was arrested and shot. And there were many people like that. And there are people who were exiled to Siberia, hard labor. Some made it back, some didn't make it back. It was not a joke to keep Yiddishkeit in Soviet Russia. Required literal Mesiras Nefesh. And the Frierdiker Rebbe demanded Mesiras Nefesh from his city. Rebbe Tzia Shem Tov, you remember Rebbe Tzia Shem Tov? He was part of the minyan that the Frierdiker Rebbe gathered together, where they gave a commitment to fight until the last drop of blood. Mezid Kutzebas was not one of that minyan. He was younger, and he was in prison not for Yiddishkeit. He was in prison for trying to help Yidden get out of Russia illegally. He was in Siberia, he was in prison, he went through the whole works, but his crime primarily was forging documents to allow Russian citizens to leave on false documents. Because after the war, they realized that the only way they could be able to survive Yiddishkeit is to get out of the country. And they had an opportunity to get many families out of Russia with forged documents from Polish refugees who had perished during the war. And he was involved in that project, as was the Moshe Katzenellenberger's mother and many other people. In any case, Yiddishkeit in Russia was Mesiras Nefesh, and the Frierdiker Rebbe demanded it of them. We're living in a time when that type of Mesiras Nefesh, that type of Kiddush Hashem is not required of them. But there's a different type of Mesiras Nefesh that's required of us, and that is to live in Kiddush Hashem, to live a life that is dedicated to sanctifying Hashem's name, and to make decisions in life not based on what's convenient for me, but what the cause demands, and to devote ourselves to it properly. So that's part of the message that we take with us from Yud Beis Tammuz, from this Yom Tov of Mesiras Nefesh. I was intending to share something else on the Sedra, but as time is moving on, I'm going to do some time. So we're going to move on to time. We are in Shara Ichad V'Emunah. I think we finished Perek Aleph, page Ayin Zayin.
I don't.
No, we didn't finish Perek Aleph. Okay. Page Ayin Zayin, we're up to for sure. And we're waiting for the Baskel to tell us the numbers.
289, 290.
Thank you very much. Mrs. Safran, 289, 290 numbers at the bottom of the page. Ayin Zayin is the number at the top of the page. We are somewhere towards the end of Perek Aleph. So we were learning about that the name of every being is significant, and that's why, remember we talked about last week about how phenomenal it was that Adam Arishan was able to name every creature and say this should be called a Shiur, this should be called a Hamer, this should be called a Sus, this should be called a Para. Hashem said to the angels, look how brilliant the man that I created is, that he can name everything. And the question was, what's so brilliant about naming everything? Choose a name. Pick a word. Doesn't have any great significance. And the answer is that in Lashon HaKodesh, in the Holy Tongue, the name that something has very great significance because it's taken from the letters of the Asara Ma'amaris, the letters from the 10 utterances which Hashem created the world, are various energies and forms of descriptive creative energy that makes things exist. And the letters of the name of a being are the combination of divine energies coming from the Asara Ma'amaris through various systems of exchanging of letters that make up the energy and the life force of that being. So when Adam Arishan said that it acts as a Shiur, what he basically was saying is that I can see the energy that is described in the Shin, together with the energy that is described in the Vav, and the energy that is described in the Reish, coming all together and making up a Shiur, and therefore it's called Shiur. And if a lamb is called a keves, that's because there's an energy of kaf, and there's a vase energy and a sin energy. They come together and they make up the word keves. Therefore, keves is the name of this animal. And the same thing for everything. Everything the name that something is called in Lashon HaKodesh is the life force and the life flow that gives it its existence and its life. And this, we explained, comes from the Asara Ma'amaris, the 10 utterances as they found in Parshas. What about the fact that not every word that exists in the world exists in Asara Ma'amaris? For example, we have brought up the fact that Evan, a stone, there's no word Evan anywhere in Parshas Bereshis in Asara Ma'amaris. So if we say that everything lives by the energy of Asara Ma'amaris that gives it life and existence, where does the stone, for example, get its life and existence? So we explained that the letters that are contained in the Asara Ma'amaris go through various systems of changing and scrambling and Heshbainis and Gematriyos, all kinds of different systems in which they are exchanged. Letters are exchanged for other letters, and the exchanging of one letter for another letter is a form of diminution, where the intensity of the energy that is involved, that is present in that being, is brought down a notch to a lower level. That's why the general creations whose names are appear in Asara Ma'amaris, they have a very intense and general energy and life-giving creative energy. While the individual beings in the world, their energy is not, they're not large enough, significant enough to be able to contain such a intense energy. Therefore, the energy has to be diminished, has to be brought down through a shtauselus, which is reflected or presented in the changing of the letters, the scrambling of the letters, the exchanging of the letters. Each exchange brings it down another notch until you get the creations of the more individual creation. So, for example, we said the word Evan, which is a stone, comes from the name Ban, which is one of the combinations of the name Yud Kei Vav Kei. You write Yud Kei Vav Kei out in a certain way. It comes to 52, Bet Barm, and then the Aleph is added from another name, and together it makes the word Evan. It all comes from the letters of the Asara Ma'amaris. So I thought we might have finished Perek Aleph, but Mr. Safran says we didn't. So I think we'll start from four or five lines from the end of the chapter, where it says, that sound right? Or do we have to go back further? Yeah. Okay, so this is the name which this object is called in the Holy Tongue. Is a vessel, a container for the life force which is contracted into the letters of this name. Which this comes through a hishtalshelus, through a whole process of diminution from the 10 utterances as they are found in the Torah. Now, why suddenly does the Shabbat Torah come in over here? Why is it significant that 10 utterances are in the Torah? After all, they're divine energy, divine creative energy. Why is it significant that they are written in the Torah? And the answer is that creation ex nihilo, something from nothing, can only come from the essence of Hashem. So if it's a diminished energy, then how can it be responsible for creation ex nihilo, for creating something from nothing? Create something from nothing has to come from the omnipotence of the essence of Hashem. And here we're saying that there's a whole process of diminution, which the individual created being is too low to be able to absorb from the Asar Amaris themselves. So it comes down through a whole process, and it's a very limited energy that fits into the character of that individual being that gives it its life force in that specific manner. So if it's tailored and diminished and cut down to size, then it's no longer the infinite essence of Hashem. So how can it create something from nothing? And the answer is that the Asar Amaris are found in the Torah. And Torah is always one with Hashem. So as diminished as it might be, it still has within it the essence of Hashem. Because Torah, the Torah and the Almighty are all one. So since this is from the Asar Amaris Shabbat Torah, because they're part of the Torah, have the strength and the life force within them, livra yesh me'achim, to create something from them. To give it life forever. Why is it that they have the power to do that? The Zohar says the Torah and the Almighty are one. Since the Torah and the Almighty are one, so the Asarim Amaris that come from the Torah have within themselves the essence of the Almighty. And the essence of the Almighty can create something from nothing. So it follows that this energy that is invested in every creation has the best of both worlds. On one hand, it's a diminished, contracted energy to fit into the capacity of the specific creation that it is involved in creating. But at the same time, because it's in the Torah, it also carries with it the essence of Hashem, which is absolutely infinite and omnipotent. So it can do the impossible, which is create something from nothing. And do it in such a manner that the detailed structure of the creation that it is affecting is reflected in its unique description, which is the benefit that we spoke about last week, that because the creation comes from a divine energy which has description, not just an infinite, it's an energy that has description. Therefore, therefore the letters represent specific description. So therefore, it's able to create the creations in such a manner that the individual characteristics of that specific creation don't begin in the creation. They begin in the energy of the creator that is responsible for creating that creation. The creation itself is only a reflection of the divine energy that creates. So when we say, for example, that we mentioned before that a shiur, an axe, is called shiur, shin vav reish, and the letters shin vav reish describe the divine energy that creates an axe from nothing to something. So every characteristic that there is in an axe is a reflection of that divine energy from which the axe is created. That also explains why you have, for example, the prophet speaks about in the divine chariot also speaks about a face of an axe. So this structure, this description exists in many levels. It exists in very lofty spiritual realms, and it goes through further hishtalshelus. It comes down into lower realms and lower realms and lower realms and lower realms, further diminutions until it comes down to the physical world and becomes the energy of a physical act. And it can create something from nothing because it's written in the Torah. The Torah, the Almighty. Now we're ready to go over to, unless there are any questions, we're ready to go over to Perek Beis, chapter 2. Sounds like somebody's calling in with a question. V'hinei, Mikan Shuvas Haminim. Once we understand this concept, that Hashem recreates the world from nothing to something every split second, and the entire existence of the world is dependent on this divine energy that recreates it every second, this will automatically help us answer a question which has been asked by many people that lack proper faith in Hashem. So this is, here we'll find the answer to the heretics, and to reveal the root of their mistake. It's those who deny divine providence. Right? Baal Shem Tov says that if a leaf turns over from one side to another, it's by divine providence. Every detail in the world is ordained by Hashem to be exactly the way it is. And if it wouldn't have been ordained by Hashem to be exactly the way it is, it wouldn't be this way. So if a leaf turns over from one side to another, there's a reason why it turned over from one side to another. Hashem wanted it to turn over from one side to another, because in one way or another, in an indirect, more direct or less direct way, this is going to assist the purpose of creation, which is that the Jewish people through the Torah should make this world a dwelling place for Hashem. And for some reason, the fact that this leaf turns over from one side to the other, it has a significant role in making that happen. Sometimes we'll be able to see how that works, and sometimes, often we won't be able to see how that works. But the fact is that every single detail in creation is by hashgacha pratis, is by divine providence, in detail of detail of detail. Now, some people have a hard time with this. You really mean that every little detail that happens is orchestrated by the Almighty with a plan, with intention? That's one thing they have a hard time with. The other thing they might have a hard time with is the signs and the wonders that are recorded in the Torah. It says in the Torah that in Egypt the water turned into blood, frogs suddenly came, all the smiting of the firstborn, the splitting of the Red Sea. So I can digest these things. These things don't make me happy. Does it really mean that these things happen? Literally. So we find that people who are lacking in faith in Hashem, and therefore they struggle with these two concepts, and with the signs and wonders of the Torah. Why do they struggle with this? They assent that in essence they're making a big mistake in their false imagination. They compare the works of Hashem, creator of heaven and earth, to the works of man and his scheme. In other words, let's say why would people have a hard time believing that every detail of creation is intentionally set out by Hashem, and that Hashem can change things from one extreme to the other at any time? He is not bound at all by nature, and he can override nature whenever he wants. Why would somebody have a hard time? Because their image of what their impression of what's going on is that Hashem created the world, and now this is the way it is. And since this is the way it is, it's not subject to change. The world is running on a system, on a natural system. It's not subject to change. However, when would a person make this mistake? He would only make this mistake if he thinks that the world can survive on its own. But once a person realizes that the only reason the world exists from one second to the next is because Hashem continues to recreate it, then he obviously understands that Hashem will recreate it the way he wants to recreate it. It's not hard to figure out that if Hashem is recreating the world every second, every detail in the world is being recreated every second from nothing to something, then obviously he's recreating it the way he wants it to be. And therefore it's clearly by divine providence, every single detail. Because Hashem is recreating it this second from nothing to something the way it's intended to be. And if Hashem wants that instead of recreating water, he could recreate blood, the water will become blood. It's not a surprise. It's not a wonder. If you accept the fact that the world can only exist when Hashem recreates it every second from nothing to something, then what's the big deal if he recreates it differently? It only exists because he's recreated. So basically he's saying like this, the people that have a hard time with this is because they compare creation, ex nihilo, to the works of man. Take, for example, this glass. This glass was blown by someone who makes glass, yeah? Well, he took raw material and he blew it into a glass. Now, where's the fellow that made this glass? Nowhere to be seen. And somehow the glass is still here. Why is that? Why don't we need him to keep on recreating it? Simple answer is because this is not made from nothing to something. This is made from something to something. There was sand, and the sand was blown into glass. Now, so first of all, the matter, the material from which this glass was made, existed before. It was only a something that was turned into another something. Second of all, even the shape and the form of this glass was also there in potential in the raw material. All that the craftsman who made this glass did was he brought out the potential from its state of potential to a state of reality. But he didn't create something from no potential. He didn't create something from nothing. He created something from something that had the potential to be this. Maybe it's easier to understand if we talk about a silver vessel. You have a pair of silver candlesticks. Silver candlesticks were made out of a chunk of silver. Because they were made out of a chunk of silver, first of all, they're not made from nothing. They're made from something, made from a chunk of silver. Second of all, the chunk of silver itself is a chunk of silver that has the potential to be shaped into any shape that the craftsman wants to shape. So when he shapes it into a set of candlesticks, that's not really his innovation, because it always had that potential. He's only revealing that potential. So since he's working with something that existed before, so therefore he doesn't have to actually stand there and recreate it every second from nothing. So, but if you're creating something from nothing, that means as far as the thing itself is concerned, it's nothing. The only reason why it's something is because the creator is making it something. So what happens if the creator stops creating it for 1 second? It's going to revert to nothing. That's what it is essentially. So if the person makes the mistake of thinking that creation is the same as the works of man, who creates something from something, then you're right. And Hashgacha Pratis is a challenge. And miracles are challenging. Hard to believe these things. But if you understand that Hashem is recreating the world every second from nothing, and that's the only reason why the world continues to exist, and not only the world in general, but every single detail in the world, then Hashgacha Pratis and miracles are an expected reality. Take, for example, a craftsman puts together a vessel. So when he has produced a vessel, as the example that I gave before, a pair of candlesticks from a silversmith. So at this point, once the vessel exists, once the pair of candlesticks or the becher or whatever it is exists, it doesn't need the craftsman anymore to be there and continue to make it. Even if he removes his hand from his handiwork, and he goes for a walk in the market. The vessel that he made retains its existence in its form and its shape. Mamish, literally, as it left the hands of the craftsman. There's no part of it that will revert to what it was before, naturally. Just like we see in the works of man, that even after man steps away from that which he has created, that which he has formed, the shape remains. So these fools think that they can make a comparison between this, the Ma'aseh Shemayim Va'aretz, to the works of heaven and earth. But their eyes are plastered. They're covered over from seeing the great difference which there is between the works of man and his schemes. Yesh miyesh is something from something. He's only changing the image. He's only changing the picture. If the tmunas chatichas kesed from a chunk of silver, the tmunas kli to a specifically designed vessel. So he's not making a vessel out of nothing, out of thin air. He's making a vessel out of a piece of silver. And as we said before, there's 2 points to that. First of all, the matter, the material from which the vessel is made existed already before he came into the picture. He doesn't have to create it. All he has to do is shape it. Second of all, even the shape is not a creation. Because a creation would imply it didn't exist before at any level, and he created it. Here, that's not the case. The shape existed before in potential. The piece of silver had the potential to be shaped into any form. So that shape also existed in potential. And all he did when he put the silver into that shape, all he did was he revealed that potential. So that is much L'maisei Shamayim v'Aretz. They want to compare that to the acts and the works of heaven and earth through Yesh Me'ayin, which is something from nothing. So if you had let's say you had nothing, and you wanted to turn it into a Shabbos candelabra, what is it made out of? What are the ingredients on the tin? Nothing. Made from nothing. Does such a thing happen? A human being for sure can't make that. The only one that can make that happen is Hashem. Why? Because he's omnipotent. He can do anything. If he would do such a thing, then he would need to continue to recreate it every second, that it shouldn't revert to total nothingness. Because it is in essence nothingness. And the only reason why it's now something is because Hashem is making it something. But if Hashem stops making it something, it would stop existing. Upela gadol. Creation, something from nothing, is a greater wonder than the splitting of the Red Sea al derech mashal by way of his hand. What's the story of the splitting of the Red Sea? It says that Hashem drove the waters with a miraculous easterly wind the entire night. So there was a miraculous wind the entire night pushing at the waters of the sea that kept them in place, that they shouldn't fall back on the Jewish people. So this miraculous easterly wind had to keep on blowing in order that the miracle should continue. What were to happen if the miraculous easterly wind would have stopped for 1 second? The water would have come tumbling down. And there would not have been a splitting of the Red Sea anymore. Why? Because the splitting of the Red Sea is only a product of this energy, of this divine miraculous wind, which causes it to split. If God would have stopped that wind for 1 split second, the waters would have come plopping down, downward, according to their nature. They definitely would not have risen like a wall. Now, one could argue that this analogy is not exactly the same as something from. Why? Because every created being has its character and it has its very existence. We know, Pasuk says, "Bereishis bara lakim es hashamayim ve'esam." Beginning, Hashem created Eis hashamayim ve'eis ha'aretz. Whenever it says the word Eis in the Torah, it comes to add something. So our sages say Eis hashamayim. The Rabbi says, Eis hashamayim means not only did Hashem create the heaven, but He also created all the hosts of the heaven. Everything that's in the heaven also created that first split second. Eis ha'aretz, and the earth, so everything in heaven and everything on earth was all created the first split second of creation. What did Hashem do for the rest of the 6 days? The rest of the 6 days, He formed everything. he had that essential material that was created the first second of creation, the matter from which everything is formed. And then by Yitzer Elokim, Hashem formed and shaped and gave character, and gave description to every part of creation. But the creating of matter was only the first split second. That's the way that Ramban explains. So it follows like this, that in the creation of any specific created being, you have two parts to it. You have the fact that it was created from nothing into something. And that something is still shapeless. It's all theoretical because it has no description whatsoever, has no color, no shape, no size, no description. And then you have the way that matter, potential matter, is shaped and formed into something specific. Now, the waters of the sea and a wall have one thing in common. They both exist. And being that they both exist, they have the potential matter of which they were originally made, before they were shaped and given description. Now, the waters were given one type of description, and the walls were given another type of description. But they originated from the same divine energy. So when we say that something which should have been flowing like water became firm like a wall, we're not changing the essence of the existence. The essence of the existence is the same. This is not, this is not. We're changing the shape of the, we're changing the character of the. So that, well, when we talk about creation, something from nothing, it's a lot more than that. Creation, something from nothing, we're not just changing the character of the existence. We're changing it from non-existence to existence. So if to split the Red Sea and to change the character of the existence, you need a continuous force. And if that continuous force stops for 1 second, it would all revert to absolute nothingness. How much more so is that the case when you're talking about something from nothing surely be. Is that making sense? Do you have any questions on that? So I speak a little louder. Only if they have a potential to be changed. A human being can only change something that has a potential to be changed. You have a piece of silver, you can make it into a bech, to a leichte. But if it's air, you can't change air into a becher. Because it doesn't have the potential. Hashem can change air or nothing, less than, into something. Right? But since it's only something because Hashem willed it to be something, and gave it the energy to become something, from his omnipotence, from his ability to do anything, therefore it will only continue to be something if Hashem continues to make it something. If he stops making it something for 1 split second, it won't be something anymore. Just like the Yamsuf only retained its state of being like a wall when Hashem's easterly wind continuously made it that way. And if that easterly wind would stop for 1 second, it would no longer be that way. So as he's saying here, although the nature that there is in water, that it flows rather than stand like a wall, is also something which is only an additional dimension of creation. The proof is that a wall of stone can stand on its own without a wind. Why does water need a wind to make it stand? Because in addition to its existence, God also gave it a character. And its character is that water flows. Indicates that the nature of the Hashem put into water is not the same. So the Kosh gave the Kalvacheme, How much more so when you're talking about creation ex nihilo, which is totally supernatural. The happening of a fellow Yezer it's much more wondrous than the spinning of the wheels. How much more so should the if the divine creative energy would withdraw from the created being. Definitely the created being would revert to absolute nothing. And so, we need the energetic. You need to have the power of the Creator in the created being continuously to give it life. To give it life, to give it existence. And they are, what is that power of existence? That the letters of the 10 utterances with which they were created, as we explained. Are there any questions? Okay, so I think we're going to hold it over here. And Lena will continue next.